ask Darloon, he is a member of our spiritual advisory board for seminary, for Sacred Journey Interfaith Seminary, and I learned something from him when he went to do his sermon. He stopped and he prayed first before he got going. And I want to do that. Create a great spirit. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to be an instrument in your hands, to be a channel of information and a channel of sacred inspiration. I'm your servant. Thank you for these words that help remind me of my true nature. Thank you. So, tomorrow we start Passover. I'm an interfaith minister. You know, I'm initiated in the Hindu lineage as a sannyasi. But for me, you know, I grew up Catholic. And so that really was more of like a confirmation for me. That was more like an anointing for me to go deeper, that sannyasi initiation. And then I went a little deeper in my understanding of all faiths and the practice of universal truths through my interfaith seminary education, and was ordained about 5-6 years ago as an interfaith minister. So I always try to bring in all of the different things that are going on with all the various faith traditions and faith practices. And so tomorrow we start Passover, right? How many of you are familiar with that? Passover. And today in the Christian tradition is Palm Sunday, right? So I thought that maybe I would intersect those two sort of, those seasonal milestones, if you will, or mile markers, and put it in a Vedic mystical significance. How many of you have seen the Ten Commandments? Charlton has them. Great, right? It's probably going to be all over this whole week. I don't know, it might even be on today as a marathon. The Ten Commandments marathon. So I thought that I would offer for you my understanding of the mystical significance and the Vedic symbolism that is kind of embedded in this story. The story of Passover. Why do Jews all over the world tomorrow, all the way up until the following week, honor this tradition and remember Passover? And what Passover was actually the angel of death passed over. So we have to start with Moses, right? So everybody knows who Moses is. Yes? When Moses was born, the Hebrews were actually slaves in Egypt. And Pharaoh was afraid that they would rise up and rebel against him. So what he did was he ordered that all the Hebrew baby boys would be killed. And his mother, Moses' mother, hid him in a basket and put him by the side of the Nile. Right? Everybody knows this story, right? You heard this before. It's not the first time you're hearing this. Really, the significance of that, when we talk about Pharaoh's daughter found Moses and entered then cosmic illusion, because something happens. A veil of ignorance comes over Moses. Because from that point forward, when Pharaoh's daughter finds him, he forgets his true identity. That song, I Know Who I Am. Moses forgot who he was, right? So Pharaoh's daughter picks him up and takes him, and that's what happens to us when we're born in this human embodiment. We forget our true nature. Pharaoh's daughter kind of symbolizes the ocean of Maya, the cosmic illusion. So what happened was, Moses actually grows up as an Egyptian prince. And he's all involved with people, places, and things. Power, property, prestige, right? He forgets his true nature. He forgets who he is. But then something happens within him. He starts to wrestle with his true purpose, his true nature, because he sees one of the Hebrew slaves being beaten. And when he sees that, his consciousness begins to dawn. He begins to spiritually evolve. And it was kind of like a dark night of the soul for Moses, because he was kind of like, my ego nature, my true nature. What's my real purpose? What's my divine purpose? You know, how many of us, I have degrees, I have a PhD in social work from Fordham University in New York. I was a lieutenant in the NYPD for 20 years. I'm a professor of criminal justice. You know, blah, 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 blah. What is that? Egyptian prince. An Egyptian prince. But the true nature of who I am, the real I am, the real I am, the I am that Moses heard when God spoke to him in the burning bush, that I am nature. It's the real, who are you? I'm not these identities. I'm not this personality. You say, okay, so what's the point then? What's the point of going for the degrees? What's the point of the success? What's the point of all of that then? So Moses has to wrestle with this. He wrestles with the Egyptian prince life or the true nature of who he really was, which was a Hebrew, right? So from that higher consciousness, he goes to battle with Pharaoh. And this reminds me of in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna and Arjuna, right? I think I've told you about that story 1,000 times, right? In the Mahabharata war between the Khandavas and the Pandavas, right? Arjuna, who's a Pandava, says to Krishna one day on his way in an Uber ride, because actually Krishna, was driving this chariot, which is kind of like an Uber driver, right? And Arjuna was the passenger, and he asks Krishna, like, so what should he do? So should he go to battle? How can he go to battle when the Khandavas are his relatives? It was a struggle. It was I'm not sure what to do. Same way Moses was struggling. It was like, well, I'm an Egyptian prince, but am I really? And, well, this isn't fair what's happening. And I'm going to go, and I'm going to go, and I'm going to go into the desert. So he goes into the desert, and something happens. A burning bush. You ever have that burning bush aha moment? And God says to him, he wants him to go, and he wants him to free the Hebrew slaves. Oh, immediately, Moses is like, I can't do it. In fact, there's a whole bunch of excuses that happen. A ton of excuses. I have it later on to talk about, but I'll talk about it now. He says, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh? Who am I? I'm not worthy. I can't do it. I'm not eloquent, right? And then in Exodus, he tells Moses, look, I will make you a god to Pharaoh, and your brother Aaron will be your spokesperson. I'm telling you that right now because I'm going to come back to it in a minute when I talk about Aaron's staff. Aaron's staff is very, very important. So what happens to Moses now is that he goes to Pharaoh. And now you know the story because you've seen the Ten Commandments 1,000 times, right? He goes to Pharaoh, he says, look, this is who I really am, this is my true nature. I'm not really that Egyptian prince. That was all a cosmic illusion, right? The ego is being destroyed. The ego, the self-identity, the identity of all of the different identities. That's the ego nature. It's being destroyed, it's being lessened. He's detaching. He's detaching from people, places, and things, right? He's detaching from I have to have these things in order to make myself important. So he goes to Pharaoh and he says, listen, let my people go. Uh-oh. Pharaoh's not having it, right? Who is Pharaoh in this story? Pharaoh is ignorance. The veil of ignorance. When I tell you that this is all a cosmic illusion, immediately we all start going, oh, I can't get this abstract thing she's talking about. Like, what is she talking about? Like, how do I detach? I am who I am. I am who I am. That's Popeye. I am what I am. But I am that. Herein lies the struggle. Herein lies the resistance. Pharaoh is the veil of ignorance. In the Ramayana, we see a king named Ravana, who is also ignorance. He signifies ignorance in the story. And so Pharaoh in this story signifies ignorance. And he's holding on, he's holding on, he's holding on. He's got that veil wrapped around everybody, the veil of ignorance, where we can't pierce the veil, where we can't cross over, where we can't pass over, right? Because it's so thick, this veil of attachment, this veil of, this is important, this isn't important, right? So what happens? Well, plagues. And you know, to me, for me, this is life on life's terms. This is the suffering. This is the, did you ever feel like, you know, you turn on CNN, right? You turn on CNN and it's like, doom on you, doom on you. Is that from Ice Age? Plagues. And every time you turn around, it seems worse and worse. Another plague, another plague, another plague, another plague. You know, in the Gospel of St. Thomas, the Gnostic Gospel, not the canonical Gospel, but the Gnostic Gospel, Jesus says, seek until you find. In other words, keep going. Keep walking through the desert. Keep walking through the plagues. Keep going, keep going, keep going. Don't be afraid. Keep going. Seek until you find. But when you find, you'll be disturbed. So that means that there's a disturbance that's going to happen, the plagues that are going to occur, right? It's okay, because then the last sentence is, and then you'll be astonished. And the astonishment is the remembering of the true nature of who we are. What does that mean, who we really are? It's the soul, it's the essence, it's the holy spark in the Kabbalah, right? The Kabbalah talks about the holy spark. That's who we are. That's the true nature of the self. It's spiritual in nature. It isn't physical. So what happens? Ultimately, the last plague is the angel of death comes. And it's going to kill the eldest Egyptian, right? So what does God tell Moses to tell the Hebrews? He says, put lamb's blood on the door. And that's how the angel of death will know, pass over. Interesting that it's put on the door. You know, in Sufism, the Sufi poet, which is the mysticism of Islam, the Sufi poet Rumi says, people are going back and forth across the doorsill where two worlds touch, which are the world of the physical realm and the world of the heavenly realm. The physical consciousness and then the spiritual consciousness. People are going back and forth, passing over, right? Passing over, passing through this doorsill, this doorway. In the Kathopanishad, in the Hindu scripture, one of the Hindu scriptures called the Kathopanishad, it's Lord Yama, who is death. Lord Death is explaining to this little boy, Nachiketas, not to fear death. And actually, Nachiketas does not fear death, because he says, I know who I am. I can never be destroyed. I can never be killed. The soul is unending, undying. It is Sat Chit Ananda, existence, knowledge, and bliss, absolute. So when I go within, when I turn on CNN, on the app, fear rises within me. Plagues, angel of death. We better get the frig out of here. We better go into the desert and find the promised land. Where is that? Canada? What are we gonna do? The message is really go within, don't go anywhere, right? Because this journey that Moses takes the Hebrews through, this 40 days in the desert, 40 years rather in the desert, it's not the destination of Canaan, the land of Canaan. It's actually the journey. And guess what happens when they finally reach the Red Sea? The Red Sea starts to part, right? Why? Because Moses takes Aaron's rod, Aaron's staff, the same staff that he used to show Pharaoh God's power. Remember that in the movie? Really remember that in Exodus and in the Jewish scriptures. But anyway, we're visual millennials. So remember the movie? That scene? Okay. So Moses takes Aaron's staff, and he parts the Red Sea. Magic, right? Not magic. Divine grace. But it takes what? Action. I have to, with faith, with trust, and with my divination tool, step in, pass through, pass over. So he passes through, and all of the Hebrews pass through. And you would think, this is human nature, you would think that the Hebrews would be like, oh my God, this is awesome. No sooner do they get on the other side in safety, they start complaining. There's nothing to eat. I haven't seen a McDonald's in miles. Where am I gonna go? We are gonna die. We would have been better off back in Egypt. Is this our mindset or what? We're complaining, whining, complaining. So God gives them manna from heaven. Manna from heaven. They're like, this is awesome. Where's the meat? Arby's. We have the meats. What does God do? God gives them quail. God continues to give them this divine grace. And after 40 years of being lost and wandering, right? The land of Canaan finally happens. But guess what? Oh my God, Moses doesn't get to go. After all of this, leading the people, leading them, going back to God, telling God, listen, they're annoying me to death over here, can't help me. And then God gives them something, satisfies them, and then they're not satisfied. Because they're constantly in clinging and craving the Buddhist teaching of the Four Noble Truths. Buddha says you're going to continue to suffer because you crave and cling. And until you detach and allow, be in gratitude, use your divination tools, you're never going to know who you really are. So something happens, and God tells Moses, all right, there's something about water. Now they wanted water. They always want something, right? It's not manna, it's quail and more water. So they want water. So God says to Moses, strike the rock with Aaron's staff, with the divination tool. Strike it once. Moses strikes it twice. And Moses had a little bit of an attitude on the second strike. When I am in ego, when I'm in the egoic self, when I think I'm the one doing it, I lose the land of Canaan. I lose self-realization. When I think I'm the one, my tool, my divination tool, because I really see Aaron's rod as a divination tool. I think I'm the one doing it. Divine grace is like, no, that's not the land of Canaan. So he doesn't get to go. So he gets on one side of Canaan, and the Hebrews are in Canaan, the land of milk and honey. But not Moses. Why? Well, I feel like two things. One is he forgot, right? He forgot. For a minute, he started remembering, he started waking up. But isn't that like us? Aren't we like that? Aren't we like, we start remembering, we start piercing the veil, the Red Sea parts, we go through, the angel of death passes over, yay, God. And then, I'm hungry, I want quail. What about the water? And then also, those of us who are light workers, ministers, be careful. Be careful. This isn't you doing it. The light workers, the energy healers, the mediums, channelers, the ministers, the rabbis, the imams, the spiritual leaders. It's not you doing it. And if you think you're doing it, you're never going to get to the land of Canaan. It's not you. It's God. It's God's grace and mercy. Allah Rahman, Allah God's grace, God's mercy, God's compassion. So bottom line, this whole story. Remember our true nature, right? We're not Egyptian princes. We got to let that go. Got to move on. I'm sorry. Got to move on. Detach from people, places, things, property, prestige, power. You better move on from that to remember the blessed self. You're going to have to go into the desert. Don't be afraid to be in the desert. You know, today's Palm Sunday also, right? So triumphant walk into Jerusalem, Jesus does, right? And they bless him with palms and they honor him with palms. However, that's the ego, right? That's the ego up on the donkey, right? The ego, the egoic self. Not that Jesus was that. No, that's symbolic. Egoic. The egoic nature. It's about me. Honor me. Here I am to save the day. Right? But enter Gethsemane. The Garden of Gethsemane, where Jesus is in so much pain. This is his humanity struggling with his divinity, right? In the Garden of Gethsemane, and he says, please let this cup pass. But then caveat, third step for recovery, for those in recovery, he makes a decision. He turns his will and his life over to the care of God. And what does he say? He says, not my will, yours be done. But he had to go through the Garden of Gethsemane first. He had to go through betrayal first, arrest first, crucifixion first, before resurrection. The Hebrews had to go through the desert. They had to escape from Egypt. They had to go through the Red Sea first. They had to wander. They didn't know where they were before they get to the land of Canaan. So what's the bottom line in terms of our themes? The theme is gratitude. Be grateful for what we have. God has given us manna. God has given us quail. God has given us water. Over and over and over again. Be in gratitude of that. Leave behind the nature of self that is not real. Discriminate between what is real and what is unreal. Vivek, Sanskrit term for discrimination. The parting of the sea is the discrimination. The passing over through the Red Sea is passing over the ocean of Maya, cosmic illusion. And so the end today's hopefully inspirational and informational message. Resurrection is coming. The land of Canaan, the promised land. What does that mean? It's not the destination. It's a consciousness. It's a consciousness. And don't be afraid of Gethsemane. Don't be afraid of the fear. Don't be afraid of the pain. Don't be afraid of the betrayal. Don't be afraid of any of that. Remember the true nature of the self. Remember that you are divine and that resurrection is happening.